First, this Wednesday, Yoon Suk Yeol has become South Korea's first sitting president to be arrested. He's being investigated on charges of insurrection in the wake of the failed martial law order on December the 3rd that plunged the country into crisis. Now, his arrest in the early hours of this morning was dramatic. Investigators scaled barricades and cut through barbed wire in order to bring him into custody. Our regional correspondent Yenna Lee has the details.
He ignored 3 summonses. He resisted arrest, but now President Yoon Suk Yeol has been taken into custody. He faces charges of inciting insurrection, which is punishable by a life in prison or even the death penalty. This accusation comes after his botched attempt at imposing martial law back in December. Korean investigators say they have around 200 pages of questions for him and 48 hours to ask them before their current warrant expires. Yoon has the right to remain silent. In fact, the president and his legal team have so far refused to cooperate, so it's unlikely to see them change track now. Yoon even recorded a video message of himself before his arrest saying that this investigation is illegal and that the country had descended into lawlessness. His supporters on the ground, too, have been spotted spreading baseless claims of election fraud regarding a vote that the Conservatives lost. And lawmakers within Yoon's party have also floated suspicions of Chinese interference without providing evidence. In any case, Wednesday's arrest was historic, as it's never happened to a sitting South Korean president before. Indeed, he hasn't been fully impeached yet. He's not allowed to do any of the work, but he still has the title. And now, President Yoon Suk Yeol is to spend the night at a detention center.
Well, to get a bit more then on the drama in South Korean politics, I'm pleased to welcome to the programme John Nilsson-Wright. He is the head of the Japan and Korea's programme at Cambridge University's Centre for Geopolitics. Hello to you, and thanks for speaking to us. Look, let's get your view first of all on those extraordinary scenes that we saw a bit of in the report there. 3,000 officers being used to arrest the president. Give us a sense of why such a large show of force was needed today.
Well, 2 reasons. First of all, the diehard Conservative supporters of President Yoon have been camped out outside the president's personal residence. They weren't prepared to move. They were there to obstruct the attempt to arrest the president. The president's own presidential security division had also been deployed. And you'll see from some of the footage the 3 kind of lines of defense, if you like, barricades to prevent the Corruption Investigation Office, as well as police officers from coming through to find a way of exercising that important arrest warrant that had been reissued. And so it was really, I think, a measure of some of their tactical ingenuity in getting in. But also, I think, a reflection of the fact that we'd already seen changes within the presidential security staff. The existing head had been called himself and summoned and questioned and then resigned. And his replacement had also been targeted in this morning raid. And eventually, I think the president bowed to the inevitable, knowing that there was really no way in which he could resist this deliberate effort by the state, after all, to exercise its legal mandate.
And look, he can be held now, President Yoon, for 48 hours. Give us a sense of what you think will happen in the next 2 days and crucially after that.
It's hard to say, but I think it's quite likely that the warrant to hold him will be extended. It would be very surprising, given all the amount of effort that's been taken to actually bring him into custody and the unprecedented nature of that, if a court did not uphold a request that will come from the CIO to continue their investigation. They have some 200 pages of questions that they want to present to the president, who at the moment is, if you like, pleading the fifth, refusing to answer questions for fear of incriminating himself. The key issue from the point of view of the investigation is what actually happened in terms of the execution of martial law. Was the cabinet adequately consulted as is required? What sort of orders were issued by the president to arrest not only leaders of the Democratic Party, but also the then leader of the Conservative Party himself? as well as the Speaker of the National Assembly. All of those issues, I think, are really central to the investigation. But there is also a second effort that is likely to develop in the next few days by the Democratic Party, the opposition party that has the majority support within the National Assembly, to launch their own special probe, if you like, their own investigation. They want to consider the possibility that President Yoon might have sought, and this is perhaps the most dramatic allegation, to provoke a crisis with North Korea in order to justify his issuing of that critical and controversial martial law order.
Well, I was going to ask you about North Korea, actually. Has Pyongyang responded to what has been happening in Seoul directly? Is the government there trying to make some kind of political capital out of this chaos in South Korea?
Yeah, I mean, in the very beginning, North Korea was actually quite restrained. And I think it was precisely because they didn't want to give at that, in the early stages of the declaration of martial law, and in that first week when there was the standoff between the National Assembly and the president's office, to give any excuse to President Yoon to justify his declaration. Since then, they've been much more critical, accusing President Yoon of being a fascist regime. And in a way, this has been a huge political opportunity for them. And of course, we've also seen in the last few days the launch of short-range missiles. On January the 6th, the launch of a hypersonic missile with a range of potentially as much as 1,000 miles, placing American bases on Guam, for example, in range of North Korea's missile capabilities. All of this is demonstrable evidence that North Korea is trying to do two things. One is to keep South Korea on the defensive, but also, I think, looking ahead to the advent of the Trump administration, to place itself in the best possible negotiating position in the hope that President Trump will be minded to try and strike a deal with Pyongyang.
And just a final question for you then on how this is playing out in Korean society, South Korean society, that is. Does President Yoon have a popular support base now, despite these extraordinary claims that are being made against him?
He has. I mean, I think the vast majority of the Korean public were opposed to the declaration of martial law, and therefore were in support of the decision to impeach the president. However, in recent days, we've seen an uptick in support for the Conservative Party, and this really boils down to the question of tactics. Conservatives would argue that the Democratic Party has overreached, that they've used the CIO, the Corruption Investigation Office, in ways that are not legally sound. And that's the argument that President Yoon has been trying to deploy himself to justify his position. This reflects a broader and historically deep-seated polarization between the right and the left in Korean politics. But I think ultimately, once the Constitutional Court makes its ruling, and I suspect it will be a ruling to uphold the decision to impeach the president, once that ruling is implemented, then of course he has no power whatsoever. And at that stage, the criminal process, the legal process, will inevitably take its course. And I suspect we will see President Yoon serving time in prison. It's almost, I think, inevitable.
Such a fascinating story. Thank you very much indeed for your analysis. It's been great to speak to you, John Nilsson-Wright, for us there, live on the programme from Cambridge.
Pleasure.